name is Edwin Marsh, and I was 63 years old when my son-in-law looked me in the eye across a restaurant table in downtown Vancouver and told me I was an embarrassment to the family he was building. He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the sommelier to hear. I remember the exact moment, because I was holding a piece of sourdough bread and I set it down very carefully, like it was something fragile, like if I moved too fast, the table might tip over and I'd have to deal with a scene on top of everything else. My daughter, my only child, the girl I'd raised on my own after her mother left when she was 4, was sitting right beside him. She was looking at the condensation on her water glass. She didn't say a word. His name was Declan Howe. He was 37, a commercial real estate developer from West Vancouver, with good hair and an expensive watch, and the kind of confidence that comes not from having done difficult things, but from having never been told no. He had proposed to my daughter 6 months earlier. She had called me from the restaurant where it happened, crying the good kind of tears, and I had sat in my shop in Abbotsford with motor oil on my hands and felt something loosen in my chest. I wanted to like him. I tried. But there is a difference between a man who earns his place and a man who rents it, and I recognized Declan the moment I met him. He drove a leased Porsche Cayenne and talked about leverage the way some men talk about the weather. He called my truck, a 2001 GMC Sierra that I've driven for 22 years, a liability. He said it twice. The second time, he laughed like it was a joke. The restaurant that night was his idea. Italian place on Robson Street, $40 for a bowl of pasta, the kind of place where they refill your sparkling water without asking. He had chosen it deliberately, I understood later. He wanted me on unfamiliar ground. We were there to discuss the wedding. Specifically, he was there to discuss the budget, which is a different thing. He and my daughter, her name is Rosalind, everyone calls her Roz, had been planning a ceremony and reception at the Fairmont Pacific Rim. The guest list was 240 people. There was a photographer from Montreal they had flown in for a consultation. There was a florist in Yaletown who charged more per arrangement than I made in a week when Roz was a child. The total projected cost was, as Declan described it with a level of pride that unsettled me, somewhere in the $700,000 to $1,000 range, give or take. He said this while cutting his steak. I had been contributing quietly through a numbered account and a holding entity I'd set up years earlier called Marsh Capital Group. The money was real, and it was mine. Roz knew I had some savings. She had no idea the savings were significant. I had made a deliberate choice, a long time ago, not to make money the language of our relationship. I didn't want her to love me differently because of a number. I didn't want her to see me differently. I wanted to be her father. That was enough. But Declan thought the money was coming from a silent business partner of his, a private equity contact he'd cultivated through what he described as his network. He'd told this to Roz. He'd told this to his parents. He'd been telling it to anyone who would listen at dinner parties in West Van. The money was mine, every dollar. He just didn't know that yet. Back to the restaurant. He set his fork down, wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin, and said, "Edwin, I want to talk about the seating plan." I said, "Fine." He said, "Rose and I have been thinking. The ceremony is going to be covered. We have media contacts, lifestyle press, a couple of people from the real estate industry who pull some weight in this city. We need the photographs to reflect a certain image. A brand, honestly. And we want the people in the front rows, the people in the shots, to be the right people." I waited. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you've been putting off. "You're a great guy, Edwin. Salt of the earth. But the flannel and the truck and the whole—" he gestured at me, at all of me. "The whole vibe isn't really consistent with what we're building." Roz agrees. "We think it would be best if you sat further back. Table 12, near the service corridor. You'll still be there. You'll just be less visible." I looked at Roz. She was still looking at the water glass. I dressed that moment up for a while afterward, tried to believe she hadn't known what he was going to say, tried to believe the silence was shock. But I'd known my daughter for 30 years. That wasn't shock. That was guilt, the specific practiced guilt of someone who has already agreed to something they know is wrong. I picked up the sourdough. I took a bite. I chewed slowly. "All right," I said. Declan looked surprised. He'd expected pushback. He'd braced for it. The surrender confused him slightly, and confusion made him generous. "It's not personal," he said. "You understand that, right? It's optics. It's just business." "Sure," I said. I drove home to Abbotsford in my truck. The highway was clear, and the Fraser Valley was dark, and I turned the radio off and drove in silence for 40 minutes, just the engine and the road. And I thought about the first time I took Roz to a Canucks game, when she was 7 and she fell asleep against my shoulder in the third period, and I carried her out of Rogers Arena and she didn't wake up once. I thought about the year I worked double shifts at the shop to pay for the private school she wanted to attend. The one with the equestrian program and the girls who wore blazers. I thought about sitting at the kitchen table helping her with calculus I barely remembered and pretending I understood more than I did so she wouldn't feel alone. Then I thought about Declan Howe gesturing at me like I was a category of problem. I got home. I went to the back of the shop. There's a storage room behind the alignment bay. Looks like a place you'd find old tires and tax records from 2009, which is exactly what it looks like because that's exactly what it is, mostly. But behind the metal shelving unit, there's a door. The door opens into an office that nobody outside of 3 people knows exists. The walls are paneled in dark wood. There's a desk with 2 monitors. There's a filing cabinet with a biometric lock, and on one wall there's a framed survey map of the Lower Mainland, annotated in my handwriting, with small colored pins marking 47 properties. My name is Edwin Marsh. I fix trucks for a living because I like fixing trucks. I also own Marsh Capital Group, which holds interests in light industrial real estate across BC, Alberta, and Ontario. The portfolio, as of last year's valuation, sits at approximately $62 million. The shop in Abbotsford is real. The money is also real. I just don't talk about either of them in the same sentence very often. I didn't get there by accident. After Roz's mother left, I took the insurance settlement from a property fire, borrowed against a second mortgage on the shop, and bought a small industrial unit in Langley that I leased to a flooring company. Then another. Then 3 more. Then I started lending to small developers who couldn't get bank financing, and the interest compounded, and I kept reinvesting, and I never upgraded my truck or my wardrobe, and the money just kept growing in the dark like a plant that doesn't need sunlight. I had never told Roz. I had been waiting, I suppose, for the right person to tell her with. Declan was not that person. I sat down at the desk. I pulled up the file I had on Declan Howe's development company, which was called Howe Pacific Properties. I had done the due diligence 6 months earlier, the week after the engagement, because I'm a careful man and careful men verify things. The picture was not good. Tree-stalled condo projects in Burnaby and North Surrey, a personal line of credit at the limit, a civil lawsuit from a contractor in Delta that had been quietly settled but not forgotten. His company had the appearance of success. The website, the office in the Marine building, the custom suits, and almost none of the substance. He was a man living on a margin call he kept deferring. The wedding money he thought was coming from a private equity partner was coming from me. Every catering deposit, every furniture rental, every bottle of wine on the approved list, my money, flowing through the holding account, which he thought was connected to a Vancouver investor named M. Capital, whose identity he had never bothered to verify beyond a phone number and a wire transfer. He had not verified because he hadn't wanted to look too closely. Men like Declan don't ask questions when the money arrives on time. I called my lawyer. His name is Patrick, and he has been with me for 19 years, and the sound of my voice at 11 at night tells him everything he needs to know about the state of things. "How bad?" he asked. "It's not about bad," I said. "It's about done. I need to revoke the funding authorization on the Fairmont contract. I need it done before the next payment clears on Friday." There was a pause. "This is about the wedding. This is about the seating arrangement." Another pause. "Understood. What else?" I told him everything. The Porsche lease that had been guaranteed against the holding account, the event production company I'd quietly funded, The Vancouver Island rehearsal dinner venue I'd approved 2 months ago? I told him to contact each one. I told him to make it clean and legal, and to invoke the conduct clause I had written into every funding agreement, a clause that allowed me to withdraw support in the event of conduct inconsistent with the values of the holding group. I had written that clause in every agreement for 15 years. I had never used it. And Rose, Patrick asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. Let it happen, I said finally. She needs to see it. The Friday payment didn't clear. I know because Declan called Roz at 8:15 in the morning, and Roz called me 11 minutes later, and I was already on my second coffee sitting on the back steps of the shop watching the fog come off the river. Dad, she said, and her voice had the thin, breakable quality of someone trying to hold themselves together through sheer technique. Dad, something went wrong. The Fairmont just called. There's a problem with the account. I said, what kind of problem? The deposit didn't clear. They're saying the payment was reversed. Declan's been on the phone for an hour, but the Fairmont's contract person is saying they can't hold the date without confirmation of funds by noon. Dad, the wedding is in 3 weeks. I watched the fog. That's a serious problem, I said. Do you have anything you could put in just temporarily, just to hold the date while Declan sorts out the account issue? We can pay you back as soon as... Ross, I said. What? There's no account issue. The line went quiet. What do you mean? I told her. All of it. I told her about Marsh Capital Group. I told her about the properties, the portfolio, the holding account. I told her that me, Capital, and the private equity partner Declan had been bragging about for 6 months was me. I told her I'd been paying for the wedding from the day the planning started. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone processing good news. That's not possible, she said. You drive a 20-year-old truck. You fix cars. I do fix cars, I said. I like fixing cars. Dad. I also own the building you're sitting in right now, I said. It wasn't quite true. She was in the condo she and Declan shared in Kitsilano, which I did not own, but I owned 4 buildings on that street, and the point landed the way I intended it to. Another silence. Then why didn't you tell me? I was waiting to see who you'd choose, I said. I wanted to know who you were becoming. She started to cry, not the clean kind. I listened to her cry for a minute, which is different from being unmoved by it. I was moved. I was also resolved. There is a difference, and it took me most of my adult life to understand it. I have to go, I said. I have people coming to the shop this morning. People, she repeated, hollow. Old friends, I said. We have some things to talk about. I hung up. The people coming to the shop were not nobody. I had spent the previous evening making phone calls. I have spent 40 years building things, and one of the things I built, quietly, without advertising it, was a set of relationships with people who matter in this province, the kind of relationships that don't happen at cocktail parties, the kind that happen on job sites in small offices over bad coffee at 7 in the morning when a deal is going sideways and you need a man you can trust. I called Reg Hollingsworth first. He's the regional VP for one of the 5 major banks in Canada, and he's been fishing with me at my property on the Skeena River every September for 16 years. He answered on the second ring. Reg, I said, I need to tell you about a man named Declan Howe. Reg said, I know that name. He's been trying to get a construction loan through our commercial division for 8 months. The file's been sitting on someone's desk. Let it sit a little longer, I said, and come to the shop Saturday. I called Yves Tran next. He's a provincial infrastructure advisor, and I had recommended him for a position with the ministry 7 years ago after we worked together on an industrial development in the Fraser Valley. He owed me nothing, but the kind of man who acknowledges that tends to pick up his phone. I made 4 more calls. Every one of them answered. On Saturday morning, I opened the bay doors of the shop, dragged out 3 folding tables, and set up a coffee urn and a box of donuts from Tim Hortons. I pulled my truck out front and left it there. I put on a flannel shirt. I was not performing anything. I was just being where I'd always been. Reg arrived first in his own truck, which was newer than mine, but not by much. Yves arrived 15 minutes later. The others filtered in, some in business clothes, one in hiking gear, all of them slightly surprised by the location, and none of them bothered by it, because these were people who had known me long enough to know that the location was the point. At 9:45, I heard the sound of a car in the gravel lot. I came out of the shop. A silver Toyota Camry, rental by the look of it, had stopped at the edge of the lot. Declan Howe got out. He was wearing the kind of casual weekend outfit that takes deliberate effort: quarter-zip pullover, dark chinos, leather sneakers. He looked like a man who had slept badly and was trying not to show it. He saw me. He saw the truck. He looked past me into the open shop bay, where he could see several men sitting at folding tables with coffee cups. He walked toward me with the careful, measured pace of someone who is angry but has decided that controlling the conversation matters more than expressing the anger. "Edwin," he said. He didn't say it warmly. "Declan," I said. "Ross told me." He stopped a few feet away. "About a Mr. Capital. About you. He said you the way you might say fraud, like it was a word with a specific charge. You've been funding the wedding from the beginning and you didn't tell us. I told Roz last week. After you pulled the money. After you put me at table 12, I said. He blinked. He regrouped. That was. He paused, recalibrating. That was a conversation about optics, about the photographs. It wasn't meant as a personal. You told me I wasn't consistent with the brand you were building, I said. Those were your words. He exhaled through his nose. I'd like to talk about reinstating the funding. We can renegotiate the terms. Whatever you need me to sign, I'll sign it. The Fairmont is still willing to hold the date if we can confirm payment by Tuesday. The deposits on the catering and the production company are still recoverable. If we move fast, we can. Declan, I said, do you know what I do for a living, other than fix trucks? He looked at me. Come inside, I said. There are some people I want you to meet. He didn't want to, but he followed me in. I introduced him to Reg. I introduced him to Eve. I introduced him to the others. I said each of their names and their titles plainly and without drama. Just the facts. Reg's bank, Eve's ministry position. A commercial developer from the Okanagan I'd done 3 deals with. A contractor from Langley who had sat on an industry board for 11 years. I watched Declan's face as each name registered. I watched him understand in real time that the gravel parking lot in Abbotsford was not what it appeared to be. We're talking about the Industrial Corridor project, I said to the room. The Port of Prince Rupert expansion and the Inland Logistics Network. Patrick sent the draft framework last night. I looked at Declan. You're welcome to stay for the meeting. Or not. Declan stood very still for a moment. He looked around the shop, at the hydraulic lifts, the tool chests, the faded calendar on the wall, and then at the men around the table. You built this, he said to me. It wasn't a question exactly, it was something between accusation and awe, and neither one came naturally to him. I built a lot of things, I said. That's what I do. He looked at the truck parked out front, visible through the open bay door. The truck, he said, is paid for, I said, unlike the Porsche. He left. I don't know exactly what he said to Rose that afternoon, but she called me at 3 o'clock and she wasn't crying this time. Her voice was flat and tired in a way that meant she'd been doing hard thinking. He told me to ask you to reinstate the funding, she said. He said if you don't, he's going to talk to a lawyer about breach of implied agreement. Patrick will enjoy that conversation, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dad, the meeting today. Those people in your shop, how long has that been going on? Most of my adult life, I said. Another pause. Why didn't you tell me any of it? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the flannel shirt and the truck and the school with the blazers and all the ways I had tried to make sure she never felt like she was missing anything, while also making sure she understood that things had to be earned, not assumed. I didn't want you to love a number, I said. I wanted you to love the man who packed your lunch. She didn't say anything for a long time. Long enough that I looked at the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "He told me you were embarrassing," she said finally, and her voice broke on the last word in a way that told me she had been carrying that sentence around for weeks, turning it over, trying to decide whether it was true. He said it so many times, and I let him. I didn't push back. I just let him. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know that too." The silence between us was different from the one in the restaurant. That silence had been distance. This one was weight. The kind that means something. "Can I come see you?" she asked. "I'll be here," I said. She came alone. She pulled up to the shop in a rental car. She had let Declan take the Subaru that morning, she told me later, a small act of detachment she hadn't fully understood at the time, and she walked across the gravel in her barn jacket and her old hiking boots, and she looked like herself in a way I hadn't seen in a while. We sat on the back steps with coffee. She didn't try to negotiate anything or frame anything or get anywhere. She just sat there. At one point she said, is it just a truck?" "It's a truck I chose to keep," I said. "There's a difference." She thought about that. He never understood that. "No," I said. She stayed for 3 hours. She helped me bleed a brake line on a customer's pickup, which she had done with me a dozen times as a teenager, and remembered better than she thought. She got grease on the barn jacket and didn't care. Around 4 o'clock she asked me if I still had her mother's recipe for beef barley soup, which I did, and we made it in the small kitchen at the back of the shop while the fog came back in off the river. We didn't talk about Declan very much. We talked about other things. The soup, mostly. A fishing trip I was planning in September, whether she remembered the time the truck broke down on the Coquihalla, and we ate vending machine sandwiches in the service station for 4 hours while we waited for the part. She remembered. The wedding at the Fairmont did not happen. The date was released. The deposits, most of them non-refundable, were absorbed by whichever party had signed the contracts, which was primarily Declan. His construction loan application, Reg told me 3 weeks later, had been declined on the grounds of insufficient demonstrated cash flow. How Pacific Properties reduced its staff to 2 people and moved to a smaller office in New Westminster. Roz moved back to Abbotsford for a while. She slept in her old room and helped at the shop some mornings and started applying for positions with a landscape architecture firm in Vancouver, which is what she'd studied before Declan had convinced her that real estate was more practical. One evening she came into the back office, the real one, the one with the monitors and the survey map, and stood in the doorway and looked at the pins on the wall for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Can you teach me?" I said, "Get a chair." I didn't lose my daughter. Not in the end. But I almost did, and the almost is something I carry with me now like a stone in a coat pocket. Always there, always waited, reminding me to pay attention. The truck is still in the lot. It still starts on the first try. A few weeks ago, Roz asked me why I'd never traded it in. The real reason. And I thought about it for a minute and told her the truth, because every time someone underestimates me on account of it, I find out exactly who I'm dealing with. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That's actually terrifying." "It's just useful," I said. She laughed. It was a good sound, the kind that takes up the whole room. "I keep the truck. I keep the flannel shirts. And I keep the back office with the pins on the wall, where my daughter now sits 2 mornings a week, learning what her father actually built. That's enough. That has always been enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the restaurant, not the phone call, not Declan standing in the gravel lot, finally understanding what he'd been dismissing for 2 years. The moment I keep returning to is the sourdough bread, setting it down carefully, like something breakable, like I was the one who needed to be handled gently. I wasn't angry at Roz in that moment. I want to be honest about that. I was something quieter than angry. Disappointed doesn't cover it either. It was more like watching a crack appear in a wall you built yourself, and knowing you had to let it spread before you could repair it properly. Declan was easy to understand. Men like him follow a simple logic: project strength, hide weakness, let other people carry the cost while you take the credit. I've met that type on job sites, in boardrooms, at banks. The packaging changes, the logic doesn't. When he told me I didn't fit the image, he wasn't being cruel exactly. He was just being exactly who he was, which is sometimes worse. What I've learned over 63 years is that the people who treat you like a liability usually need you more than anyone else in the room. They just can't afford to admit it. Declan needed my money, my connections, my daughter's stability, my quiet willingness to absorb his contempt. He needed all of it. And the moment I stopped providing it, his whole structure came apart in about 72 hours. That's not a coincidence. That's consequence. Actions have weight, and eventually the weight settles where it belongs. But the harder truth, the one I had to sit with on that drive home along the highway, was about Roz. She is smart. She always has been. Smart enough to know what Declan was doing at that table, and smart enough to choose silence anyway. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a failure of nerve. And nerve is something you have to build the way you build anything, slowly, with use, under pressure, over time. She hadn't built it yet. She'd been too comfortable, too cushioned, too protected from the consequences of getting things wrong. That was partly on me. I'd spent 30 years making sure she never had to scramble, never had to sit in a service station eating a vending machine sandwich and wonder if things were going to be okay. I thought I was giving her security. I think now that I was also, without meaning to, giving her a kind of softness that Declan was able to get inside of. What I didn't take away from her, though, was her honesty. That was still there. I could hear it in her voice when she called me from the rental car, flat and tired. She wasn't angling for anything. She was just reckoning with what she'd done. And a person who can reckon honestly with themselves, who has the decency to look at their own choices without flinching, that person can find their way back. She sat with me on those back steps and helped me bleed a brake climb, and got grease on her jacket and didn't apologize for any of it. That mattered more than anything she could have said. I keep the truck because it tells me the truth about people. I kept the back office quiet because it let me see clearly. And I let the wedding collapse because sometimes the most patient thing a father can do is refuse to prevent a lesson that needs to happen, not out of cruelty, out of respect for who she could become if she had to. She's in the back office 2 mornings a week now. She asks good questions. She's starting to understand that the pins on the wall aren't just properties, they're decisions. 40 years of deciding what actually matters and holding to it. That's the only thing I know how to teach. Show up as you are. Do the work. Don't dress up your worth for anyone's approval. The people who matter will figure out what you're made of. And the ones who don't, well, they tend to sort themselves out eventually.